She had always been someone who blended into the background. Not because she wanted to, but because life had taught her to be quiet, to move through the world without drawing attention. People noticed her only when they needed something, like a smile at the counter, a polite hello, or an answer to a question. Most of the time, she went unnoticed, and she had learned to accept it. She liked it that way, in a strange sense. There was freedom in invisibility, a space to breathe without judgment, to be herself without scrutiny. But there was one thing that made her feel alive in a way. The rest of her life could not. Music. She didn't remember a time without music. Not the music everyone hears on the radio or streaming online, but the kind that lives in your bones, that makes your heart beat in rhythm with invisible notes. From the moment she first touched a piano, she knew it was different. Her first piano wasn't grand or shiny. It was old, the kind with a few keys that didn't work perfectly, a small scratch along the top, and a faded bench that squeaked when you sat on it. And yet, it felt like the most perfect instrument in the world. When she pressed the keys, even if the notes were off or the sound was rough, something inside her opened. Music became her companion, her secret, her escape. It was a language she could speak without words, a way to tell stories that no one else could understand. Her life during the day was ordinary and sometimes harsh. She had a job that demanded her energy and attention, but gave little in return. The hours were long, the work repetitive, and the people around her often impatient or distracted. It was the kind of life that could make someone feel invisible, like their existence didn't matter. She knew that feeling well. She had learned to move quietly through the hallways, to smile politely, to say what was necessary without revealing too much. Her thoughts were her own, and her dreams were held tightly in her heart, like fragile glass she didn't want anyone to drop. And yet every evening, when she returned to the small apartments she rented in the corner of the city, she felt a spark of hope. There, the piano waited for her. At first it was simple notes, small melodies she barely dared to call music. She would sit for hours, pressing keys slowly, letting the sound fill the room. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine herself in a concert hall, playing for a crowd that didn't exist yet. Other times, she would let the music pour out of her like water, fast and messy and full of feeling. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played because it was the only way she could breathe. Each note was a small victory over the noise of the world, a way to reclaim herself after a day that often demanded everything else. And in those moments, she felt strong, whole, and unshakable. It wasn't always easy. She had faced moments where she doubted herself, where she wondered if music was just a foolish dream. She held on to because life had been too cruel to let her have something else. Sometimes the keys didn't respond the way she wanted. Her fingers stumbled, or the song in her mind didn't match the song that came out. Frustration would rise, and she would take a deep breath, reminding herself that every musician, every pianist she admired, had started the same way. Music was patient, she realized. It would wait for her, listen to her, and allow her to grow at her own pace. And so she practiced, slowly, methodically, day after day, letting the music shape her more than she could shape it herself. The neighbors didn't know. They would hear faint notes drifting through the walls sometimes, a melody that hinted at something beautiful, but never revealed the depth behind it. Some would pause in the hallway, listening for a moment, and then shrugged and move on. She didn't mind. She wasn't playing for recognition. Her audience was herself, and perhaps the tiny sparks of hope she felt each time she touched the keys. She remembered one evening, sitting in her small apartment, rain tapping lightly against the window, playing a melody she had made up on the spot. The sound was soft but alive, curling around her like a warm blanket. For a moment, she forgot the stress of her day, the bills, the loneliness, the invisible weight of life. All that existed was the music and her, and it was enough. Friends rarely asked about her music. She had a few colleagues she could talk to, people she trusted to share small parts of her life, but most didn't know about the piano. They didn't know that there was an entire world inside her that no one had seen. Sometimes she wondered if they would understand if anyone could. Music was personal, sacred even, and revealing it felt like showing a piece of her soul she wasn't ready to share. She liked it that way, the secret held tightly between her and the piano. It was a private power, a quiet magic that belonged only to her. And in a world that often felt loud and chaotic, she cherished that private space. Yet she knew there was something unusual about her gift. From the beginning, her teacher, an old mentor who had noticed her curiosity and persistence, had told her that there was a rare quality to the way she played. Not just the skill, but the feeling behind it. The emotion she could put into the notes, the way she could make a simple melody feel like a story. She didn't always understand what he meant, but she felt it. There were moments when she played, usually alone, when she would pause and realize that her fingers had moved almost on their own, that the music had flowed through her instead of being forced. Those were the moments she lived for. They were fleeting yet unforgettable, and they reminded her that she was capable of something extraordinary, even if no one else had seen it yet. Life, however, had a way of pressing on, of demanding attention and of testing patience. There were days when she would come home exhausted, when her body ached, and she didn't feel capable of touching the piano. On those nights, she would stare at it from across the room, longing for the comfort it offered. She would imagine the music as if it were a friend speaking to her, and somehow she would find the strength to sit down and play, even if only for a few minutes. And when she did, the world outside her apartment seemed to fade, leaving only the notes and her heartbeat. Music was not just an escape. It was a reminder that she existed, that she mattered, that there was beauty in the world, even when everything else seemed dull or harsh. She had learned to live quietly with hope. She didn't talk about it much because people often didn't understand dreams that didn't have immediate rewards. She didn't speak of the piano because she wasn't ready for judgment, for expectation, or for disappointment. Music was her sanctuary, a place where the world's rules did not apply, and she protected it fiercely. Yet, even as she kept her talent hidden, there was a part of her that wondered what it would be like if someone heard her. What would it feel like if the music she nurtured in secret became visible to the world, if someone truly listened and felt the way she felt when she played? It was a frightening thought, but a tempting one. The idea lingered in her mind like a soft note, persistent yet delicate, waiting for the right moment to grow into something real. Some nights, when the city was quiet and the streets empty, she would play for hours, letting her fingers tell stories she could not say with words. Sometimes she imagined an audience of strangers who needed to hear her music, who would feel something in her melodies that would reach into their hearts. She imagined them sitting silently, listening, letting her music speak for her. And in those imagined moments, she felt alive in a way that the ordinary world had never allowed. It was in those hours that she understood the true power of music, not fame, not applause, but the ability to touch lives, even silently, through something as simple as a note. As the seasons changed, she continued her routine. The world around her moved fast. People rushed past her on the streets, consumed by their own lives and worries. But she had her piano, her music, and her quiet moments. She had learned to find beauty in the small things, a sunset that reminded her of a melody, the sound of rain that inspired a new rhythm, the laughter of a child that echoed like a soft chord in her mind. These small pieces of life became notes in the music she played. And slowly, without her realizing it, her simple practice began to carry something more profound. Every day, every hour spent with her instrument added depth and emotion to the music she created. And with every passing day, she grew stronger, more confident in the world that she still mostly faced in silence. She never stopped dreaming, even in the most ordinary moments. While washing dishes or walking home after work, she would hum tiny melodies, tapping rhythms on her hands, letting music fill the gaps of her life. It was her constant companion, her invisible friend, the part of her that refused to be ordinary even when the world treated her as such. And though she didn't know it yet, these simple notes, practiced in quiet solitude, were preparing her for a moment she could not yet imagine, a moment when her life and the lives of others would be changed forever by the music she had always kept in secret. The morning started like any other. She woke up early, feeling the weight of another long day ahead. The apartment was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the heater and the distant sounds of the city coming alive outside. She moved through her small space with practiced care, making her coffee, preparing her bag, and reminding herself of the tasks waiting for her. Her mind wandered briefly to the piano sitting quietly in the corner. It had been a long night of practice, her fingers still tingling from the melodies she had coaxed out of it. She wanted nothing more than to go back and lose herself in the music again. But life had other plans. At work, the morning was busy as usual. People came and went, voices overlapping, the usual clatter of keyboards, phones ringing, and chairs scraping against floors. She moved quietly through the space, completing her tasks with care, never seeking recognition, never drawing attention. And yet on this particular day, something was different. She had barely started her shift when a manager approached her with a look she had never seen before, part curiosity, part urgency, and part disbelief. "We need you to play the piano," the manager said, almost as if speaking to herself. The words hung in the air, strange and heavy. She blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "I don't understand," she said softly. The manager hesitated for a moment, then explained. There was an event that required some live music, something to calm the atmosphere and fill the space with warmth. No one else had the skill to play, and someone had remembered that she knew how. She felt her chest tighten. She hadn't played for anyone outside of her apartment in years. Not really. The thought of eyes on her, people watching and judging every note, made her stomach twist. "I can try," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She had no idea how she could do this. No idea if her fingers would obey or if the music would even sound right. But something inside her stirred a quiet determination that had been nurtured in the long hours of private practice. She couldn't say no. She couldn't let fear win, not this time. When the event began, she was led to the piano, which stood in a corner of a large room filled with people. They were chatting, laughing, unaware of the moment about to arrive. She sat down slowly, her fingers hovering over the keys. The room seemed suddenly huge, echoing and intimidating. Every sound of movement felt magnified. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath, and tried to calm the fluttering inside her chest. She started with simple notes. Hesitant at first, testing the keys, letting the sound settle into the space. The room continued to chatter for a few seconds, but slowly, people began to notice. There was something gentle, delicate, in the way the notes emerged. It wasn't perfect, not technically flawless, but it was honest. It was music born from experience, from a life of quiet reflection, from someone who had poured her soul into practice in the shadows. As she continued, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved more fluidly, pressing each key with intention, with feeling. The simple notes began to form a melody, soft at first, almost shy, but growing richer, more expressive. The sound seemed to ripple through the room, touching the edges of conversations. Pausing laughter and turning attention toward her. People stopped mid-step, mid-sentence. Some glanced toward the piano with curiosity, unsure of what they were hearing. Others stood still, their eyes widening slightly, as if they couldn't believe the music coming from someone they had never noticed before. She hadn't realized it, but she was telling her story with every note. The melodies were not just sounds. They were emotions, memories and dreams shaped into music. Each chord carried the weight of her solitude, the quiet strength she had built over years of private practice, the tiny moments of joy she had found in her own company, and the deep yearning to be seen, even if only through her music. She played as if the room didn't exist, as if only the piano in her hands mattered. And in that space, she felt free. The room grew quieter, the energy shifting. People began to lean forward, drawn in by the authenticity of the sound. It was not flashy, not meant to impress, but there was a magnetism to it, a pull that made listeners pause and feel. The music seemed to speak directly to them, bypassing words and reaching straight to the heart. Some closed their eyes, letting the notes wash over them. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they were witnessing something unusual, something genuine. She noticed the small reactions around her. A woman near the back smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. A man leaned against a wall, nodding subtly, as if in rhythm with the feeling in the room. Children, usually restless in such settings, sat quietly, captivated by the movement of her hands and the sound that filled the air. She hadn't intended to affect anyone. She was simply playing, letting the music flow naturally. But slowly, she realized that she was connecting with everyone present, that her private world was now touching the lives of others as she played. Memories surfaced her first piano lessons as a child. The hours she had spent alone practicing in a small room. The nights when music was the only comfort after long days of worry and exhaustion. She remembered moments of joy, small victories, and even heartbreak, all woven into the fabric of her melodies. The music became a living diary, each note a word, each phrase a sentence, each piece a chapter of her story. And for the first time, she felt what it meant to share that story without saying a single word. Her hands moved with more confidence now. She added small flourishes, gentle trills, subtle changes in rhythm, letting the emotion guide her rather than thinking about technique. The piano responded like an old friend, forgiving, understanding, carrying her message faithfully. She felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and strength, knowing that everyone in the room could hear her innermost thoughts if they chose to listen. And they did. She could sense it in the way they leaned in the stillness of the room, in the quiet awe that seemed to settle over the space at one point. She looked up briefly, and her eyes met a few of the faces in the audience. There was no judgment there, only attention, curiosity, and, in some cases, admiration. It was an unfamiliar sensation, being seen not for her quiet demeanor or her day-to-day work, but for the music that had lived inside her all along. She felt exposed and powerful at the same time, a combination she had never experienced before. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the connection she felt with everyone around her. Time seemed to stretch and compress at once. What felt like minutes may have been an hour. She lost herself in the music, letting it flow naturally, following the instincts that had been honed in countless hours of private practice. The room was alive with sound, but silent in attention. People had stopped thinking about their conversations, their phones, their tasks. They were fully present, carried along by the music that had emerged from someone they had overlooked for so long. She noticed small details she had never seen before: the way the sunlight hit the piano, casting soft shadows across the keys, the tiny movements of people's faces as they listened, the faint echoes bouncing off the walls. Every detail seemed to matter, as if the world had slowed down to accommodate the moment. She realized that she was no longer playing for herself alone. She was playing for them, and in doing so, she was sharing a piece of herself that words could never convey. When the last notes faded, there was a pause, a stillness that seemed almost sacred. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, slowly, the room erupted in soft applause, hesitant at first, and then more confident as the realization of what they had just witnessed settled in. People smiled, some whispered to each other, some shook their heads in disbelief. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and wonder. She had been terrified at first, unsure if she could do it, and yet she had played, and the music had done more than she had imagined. Her manager approached her with wide eyes, a mix of astonishment and admiration. I didn't expect that," they said. "That was incredible. Truly incredible." She simply nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Words felt inadequate. The music had done what words could not, had told her story, and it had reached people in a way she had never experienced. After the event, people came up to her, expressing their amazement and curiosity. They asked questions, not just about her playing, but about her, about who she was. For the first time, she realized that her music had given her visibility. Not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that inspired connection. People were interested in her not because of her appearance, not because of her job, but because of the honesty, emotion, and skill in the music she had shared. That night, as she returned home, she felt different. There was a quiet satisfaction that ran deeper than pride. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, faced her fears, and discovered that the world could respond with appreciation rather than judgment. Her piano had always been a private friend, but now it had become a bridge between her world and the world around her. She sat down briefly, letting her hands rest on the keys, and smiled softly. The notes still echoed in her mind, a reminder of what was possible when she allowed herself to be seen, even in the smallest way. She knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The experience had shown her the power of her music, the potential to reach others, and the courage that lived inside her. What had begun as a simple act of obligation to play for a small event had turned into something transformative. She had discovered that the notes she had practiced in quiet solitude were not just expressions of her inner world, but a language capable of touching hearts, moving minds, and changing the way people saw her. And in that moment, as the city outside her window began to fade into night, she realized that the piano was no longer just a private escape. It was a voice, a bridge, a way to connect, and perhaps even a path toward a future she had never dared to imagine. She didn't know exactly where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of possibility, of hope, and of a quiet, unstoppable power that had always been inside her, waiting to be heard. She'd never planned for anyone to know her story. Her life had been a series of quiet struggles, moments that had shaped her, but that she rarely spoke about. The piano had always been her confidant, the one place where her feelings could flow freely without fear of judgment. But after that first performance in front of people, something had changed. Music had become more than a private escape. It had become a bridge between her past and the world, a way to communicate experiences she had never shared aloud. That evening, she returned home with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her hands were sore from playing, but her mind was alive, replaying the notes, the pauses, the reactions of the listeners. She sat at her piano and let her fingers wander across the keys without thinking, letting the music reflect her mood. Slowly, a melody began to form, one that carried more weight than the playful or timid pieces she usually played. It was deeper, more deliberate, filled with emotions that had been buried for years. Each note seemed to whisper fragments of her story. Her childhood had been quiet, but not easy. She had grown up in a small, cramped apartment where money was always tight and every day was a struggle to get by. There were times when the power would be out, and she would sit in the dim light, wishing for something beyond the walls of her small home. The piano had arrived one day through the kindness of a neighbor who had seen a spark in her eyes. It wasn't new or fancy, but it was hers, and it became the center of her world. She had spent hours learning, making mistakes, laughing at her own errors, and slowly shaping the music that would later define her. The piano had been a way to escape, a way to breathe, and eventually, a way to process everything she couldn't say aloud. As she played that evening, memories of her younger years surfaced. She remembered sitting on the faded bench, fingers stumbling over keys, trying to mimic melodies she had heard on old records. There were moments of frustration, moments when she wanted to give up. But there was also a stubborn determination, a refusal to let the music slip away. Each practice session was more than just learning songs. It was a way to assert her existence, to carve out a place in a world that often overlooked her. The music carried the weight of her resilience, the story of someone who refused to disappear despite life's hardships. The melody she played now was different from anything she had ever attempted. It wasn't structured or rehearsed. It was raw and instinctive, flowing directly from her heart. Each note spoke of long nights alone, of moments when she had felt invisible, of tears shed quietly in the dark. There was sorrow, yes, but also strength, a quiet power that came from surviving and continuing to hope. The music moved through highs and lows, mirroring the rhythm of her life, shifting from gentle whispers to bold declarations. It was her past, her present, and a hint of her future all at once. Her neighbors, who had once only heard faint fragments of her playing, now listened more intently. The sound carried through the thin walls, filling the quiet night with a story they couldn't put into words. Some paused in their own apartments, leaning against doors or windows, surprised by the depth and emotion of what they were hearing. It was more than music. It was a life expressed in sound, a window into experiences that were usually hidden. And even though they didn't know her personally, they felt the weight of her journey, the honesty in every note, and the resilience that radiated through the melody. She remembered the times when music had been the only thing that kept her going. There were nights when the world felt particularly harsh, when worry and fatigue weighed heavily on her shoulders, and she had nothing to comfort her except the piano. In those moments, she had played without thought, letting the sound wash over her like a protective wave. The notes had carried her through grief, disappointment, and loneliness, helping her find clarity when life felt overwhelming. That same clarity now guided her fingers across the keys as she poured her story into the melody. The audience at the event, though not present now, had already felt a fraction of this story. And as she practiced at home, she imagined them listening again, sensing the pain and hope embedded in each note. It was strange, this connection she could form without speaking, without seeing faces, without a single word. Music was the messenger, and she had learned how to speak fluently through it. Each crescendo, each pause, each delicate phrase carried meaning, allowing her to communicate what she had never been able to say aloud. Her life had not been without challenges. Outside of her private struggles, there were days when work demanded too much, when exhaustion threatened to extinguish her creative spark. There were moments when she doubted her talent, wondering if anyone would ever notice, if the effort was worth it. Yet even in those moments, she found solace in the small victories, the first time a chord sounded right, the first time she played a piece perfectly from memory, the tiny smile she gave herself when she discovered a new rhythm. Each small achievement added up, creating a foundation of confidence that had been invisible to the world but deeply felt by her. That night, as she played, she also reflected on the people she had met over the years. There were a few mentors, quiet guides who had recognized her potential and offered advice without imposing expectations. They had encouraged her to explore her own voice, to let emotion guide her rather than technique, and to embrace the imperfections that made her music unique. She remembered their words, their kindness, and their belief in her, even when she had struggled to believe in herself. The piano had become a repository of all those lessons, a living record of guidance, patience, and trust. The melody evolved, carrying her through memories of friendship, loss, and moments of unexpected joy. She recalled a time when a friend had encouraged her to perform at a small gathering, a nervous attempt that had ended with laughter and applause. She remembered the pride she had felt, the way the music had brought people together, even briefly, in the realization that sharing her talent could create connection. It had been a small step, but it planted a seed that would eventually grow into something far greater. As she continued, the piano became more than an instrument. It became a mirror, reflecting her inner world with clarity. Every key she pressed was a choice, a reflection of her emotions, a step along the path she had walked alone for so long. The melody was not just a story of sorrow. It was a story of triumph, of perseverance, of a quiet genius that had been nurtured in secrecy. She realized that the music was teaching her as much as she had been teaching it. It reminded her of her strength, her courage, and the value of her experiences, even those that had seemed insignificant at the time. Her fingers moved with fluidity now, guided by instinct and emotion rather than thought. She explored new harmonies, experimented with timing, and allowed the music to surprise her. Sometimes a note would come out unexpected, a small imperfection that she embraced rather than corrected. These imperfections added character to the melody, mirroring the unpredictability of life and the beauty that could emerge from struggle. In these moments, she felt fully alive, fully present, fully connected to herself and the music she created. She also remembered the quiet moments of doubt, the times when she had felt unworthy of recognition, when she had hidden her talent out of fear. Those memories surfaced as gentle, melancholic notes, adding depth to the melody. But even in these moments of reflection, there was hope. She realized that the doubts had shaped her, had made her more resilient, and had allowed her to appreciate the moments of triumph all the more. Each challenge, each struggle, had contributed to the music she now played with confidence and authenticity. As the night wore on, she found herself lost in the flow of the melody. Hours passed unnoticed as she moved through the emotions of her past, weaving them into a tapestry of sound. The music was not meant for anyone's approval. It was an act of self-expression, a celebration of survival, and a testament to the power of perseverance. And yet, she sensed that anyone who heard this music, even by chance, would feel the honesty, the humanity, and the depth of experience behind it. Finally, she played the last note and let her hands rest gently on the keys. There was a silence in the apartment, a quiet that felt filled with meaning. She leaned back, closing her eyes, and allowed herself to breathe deeply. Feeling a sense of peace she had rarely experienced. The music had revealed parts of her that she had long kept hidden, and in doing so, it had affirmed her value, her strength, and her ability to touch the lives of others without saying a single word. She realized that this was only the beginning. Her music had become a vessel for her experiences, a way to communicate with the world and a method to connect with people on a level deeper than conversation. The melodies she created carried her story, her emotions, and her essence. She had discovered that sharing her music was not just about performance, it was about connection, empathy, and the power of expressing oneself honestly. For the first time, she felt a sense of responsibility. She wanted to continue playing, to explore new melodies, to share her story not only for herself, but for anyone who might need to hear it. Music had transformed from a private refuge into a bridge, linking her inner world with the outer world, allowing her to communicate, inspire, and heal. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, she felt ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that her story, her talent, and her resilience could resonate far beyond the walls of her apartment. After that first unexpected performance, life did not immediately change. She returned to her routine, waking early, working her long hours, and coming home to her small apartment. On the surface, nothing looked different. The streets were the same, the people around her the same, and her responsibilities remained heavy. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of her days, something new had begun to stir. The event had left an imprint, a subtle shift in how the world responded to her. Even if she didn't fully notice it yet, the next morning at work, she felt the eyes of a few colleagues lingering on her a little longer than usual. They smiled differently, with genuine warmth, rather than the usual polite gestures. A coworker paused by her desk, asking a casual question about the event the night before. Clearly curious but hesitant to seem intrusive, she answered carefully, keeping her voice low. But a small spark of confidence grew inside her. For the first time, she realized that people were seeing her in a way they had not before, just noticing something unique, something beyond her quiet presence. Word of her talent began to spread slowly. Someone had mentioned her performance to a manager. Another coworker had shared their amazement with friends, and soon the tiny ripple of attention became a small wave. Invitations to play at casual gatherings, company events, and social functions began to appear. At first, she felt hesitant. The thought of performing in front of people, letting them into the intimate world she had always protected, was frightening. But she remembered the feeling of connection she had experienced the first time she played, the way music had allowed her to communicate without words. That memory gave her courage. Her first formal invitation after that event was for a small community gathering. She arrived early, her heart pounding, hands trembling slightly. The room was filled with people she had never met, and the piano sat under soft lighting, waiting to be played. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was not about perfection, but about honesty. When she pressed the first notes, she felt that familiar flow. The way her fingers instinctively knew the keys. The way the music seemed to carry the emotions she had tucked away for years. As the melody filled the room, she noticed the same reaction she had seen before. People stopped what they were doing, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, all of them absorbed in the sound. She could feel their attention like a gentle current, guiding her hands, encouraging her to explore the music even further. For the first time, she realized that her playing was not just an act of personal expression. It was a gift, something that could touch others, inspire them, or even bring comfort. After that performance, the invitations became more frequent. She was asked to play at charity events, local gatherings, and small concerts. Each time, she felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. But the growing confidence she carried from her previous experiences helped her overcome the fear. She began to see her music not just as a personal escape, but as a tool for connection, a way to reach people in a way that words could never do. The idea that her music could matter to others was both humbling and empowering. One day, she received a call from a larger venue, a community hall that hosted cultural events. The person on the phone had heard about her performances and wanted her to play for a larger audience. Her first instinct was to decline, to avoid the pressure and the exposure. But then she thought about the moments she had already experienced, the quiet triumphs she had felt, and the way her music had moved others. She agreed cautiously, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. When the day arrived, the hall was buzzing with anticipation. She walked to the piano, feeling the weight of the room, the eyes of strangers fixed on her. For a moment, panic rose in her chest. But then she remembered the feeling of her hands on the keys, the familiar flow of melody that had always guided her. She let herself close her eyes, take a deep breath, and play. The music that emerged was unlike anything she had played before in public. It was full of emotion, nuanced with the experiences she had lived through. Each note carried her story, her struggles, her triumphs, her quiet courage. The audience was silent, captivated. Some smiled, some closed their eyes, some even wiped away a tear. She had never imagined that her music could have such an effect, that the feelings she expressed privately could be understood and shared by so many. After the performance, people approached her, their words full of warmth and appreciation. They asked questions about how she had learned, what inspired her, and if she would be willing to perform again. She answered humbly, sometimes quietly, always grateful, but also a little amazed at the attention. It was a new experience for her to be valued and recognized for something that had been so deeply personal. The recognition she began to receive slowly built her confidence in ways she had never expected. She started to see herself differently, not just as someone moving quietly through life, but as someone capable of touching hearts, of inspiring others, of creating moments of beauty and connection. This realization gave her courage to take on challenges she might once have avoided, to explore her music more boldly, and to trust in her own abilities. Her growing reputation also brought new relationships into her life. People who shared her passion for music, mentors who wanted to guide her, and fellow performers who encouraged collaboration all became part of her world. These connections enriched her experience, giving her not only opportunities to play, but also guidance and friendship. She realized that while she had always valued her independence, there was also strength in connecting with others who shared her values and understood her journey. With each performance, she learned more about herself and her music. She discovered how to convey emotion more deeply, how to interpret melodies in ways that spoke directly to the audience, and how to embrace the imperfections that made her playing unique. She found joy not only in playing but in seeing the reactions of others, in understanding that her music could create a shared experience, a moment of connection that transcended language and background. The opportunities continued to grow. She was asked to perform at larger events, to collaborate with other musicians, and even to teach small workshops for children and beginners. Each step was both challenging and exhilarating. She often felt nervous before performances, questioning whether she could meet expectations, whether her music was good enough, whether she could truly connect with the audience. But each time she played, she found that the answer came through her fingers, through the melodies that had always been a part of her. One particularly memorable event was a community celebration where local artists and performers showcased their talents. She was invited to perform alongside singers, dancers, and other musicians. At first, she felt intimidated, comparing herself silently to the others, wondering if her quiet, emotional piano pieces would fit. But when she played, she realized that her music had its own space, its own voice. The audience responded with attention and warmth, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her music was no longer a private refuge. It was a presence, a force that could move people, bring joy, and create connection. Recognition also began to affect her inner world. She started to see herself in a new light, not as someone who had been invisible or overlooked, but as someone capable, creative, and influential. This shift in self-perception allowed her to approach life with more confidence, to speak up and to pursue opportunities that once would have felt impossible. She discovered that acknowledgement from others, while never the reason she played, could reinforce her sense of purpose and motivate her to continue growing. Her growing visibility also brought unexpected challenges. Some people didn't understand her quiet nature or the depth of her private struggles. There were those who judged her for being reserved, who couldn't grasp that her music came from a place of authenticity rather than performance. She learned to navigate these dynamics with grace, focusing on those who valued her for her talent and her honesty, and letting go of the opinions that didn't serve her growth. In doing so, she strengthened not only her skills, but also her sense of self. Through it all, the piano remained her anchor. It was the foundation upon which her confidence, expression, and connection were built. No matter how large the audience, how busy her schedule, or how challenging the day, she returned to it for grounding, for reflection, and for the pure joy of creating music. She realized that recognition and opportunity were not just rewards, they were invitations to deepen her craft, to explore new dimensions of expression, and to touch more lives with the gift she had nurtured for so long by now. She had begun to see a pattern in her life. Each time she allowed herself to step forward, to share her talent, to embrace the vulnerability of performance, she was rewarded with growth, connection, and affirmation. Each note she played was a testament to her perseverance, her resilience, and the countless hours of practice she had invested in her craft. And each new opportunity reminded her that her music had meaning beyond her private world, that it could inspire, console, and uplift those willing to listen. She began to dream in new ways. What once felt like simple hope now became tangible possibilities. Perhaps she could play for larger audiences, collaborate with other musicians, or even teach more widely. Perhaps her music could reach people who needed it most, people who, like her, had felt invisible or unheard. These ideas no longer frightened her, they excited her. She discovered that stepping into the light, even cautiously, could bring unexpected rewards, and that the world could respond with appreciation and connection when she allowed herself to be seen through recognition. She also discovered the joy of sharing her story indirectly. People were drawn to her not only because of her skill, but because of the emotions, honesty, and humanity in her music. Each performance became a conversation, a shared experience, a moment where lives intersected through sound and feeling. And in these moments, she realized that her life, once quiet and unnoticed, could have impact, could inspire, and could touch hearts far beyond her own small world. She never imagined that a single decision, a moment of courage, could change the course of her life. Yet, looking back, she could see how everything had led to this point. The quiet hours spent at her piano, the simple notes practiced in solitude, the hesitant first performance, they had all built something far greater than she had ever dreamed. Music, once a private sanctuary, had become the bridge between her inner world and the lives of others. It had shown her strength she didn't know she possessed, and given her a voice when words had often failed. As her reputation grew, so did the opportunities. She was invited to perform at larger venues, collaborate with other musicians, to even contribute to community projects that used music to inspire and heal. Each new experience was both thrilling and intimidating. There were moments when she questioned herself, wondering if she could live up to expectations, if her talent was enough, or if she truly belonged in this new world. But every time she sat at the piano, every time her fingers pressed the keys, those doubts melted away. The music reminded her of who she was, where she came from, and what she was capable of. She remembered the nervousness that had gripped her the first time she played in front of others. She recalled the trembling hands, the racing heartbeat, the uncertainty that had made her question whether she could go through with it. And yet, that experience had opened the door to a life she had never imagined. She realized that fear and courage often lived side by side, that stepping into the unknown was the only way to grow, and that every note played with honesty could create a connection that was impossible to predict.